After 10 years of being cast aside, I finally bought my dream villa by the sea. Then my parents called. "Your golden sister's family is moving in. Don't like it. Leave." I said nothing. But when they arrived, my surprise was waiting one they'd never forget. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the ocean, as I stood on the balcony of my new home. The scent of salt in the air mixed with the faint trace of freshly brewed coffee from earlier. It was quiet here, peaceful. The kind of quiet that had been so hard to find in the chaos of my family's expectations. For years, I'd been the invisible one, always in the background, overlooked and dismissed. My sister, Mayim, was the one they adored, the one whose every move was praised. But here, in this villa, none of that mattered. I ran my fingers along the rim of my wine glass, lost in the tranquility of the moment. I had worked so hard for this. My own place, away from the noise, away from them. But then, just as I was starting to settle into this new chapter, the call came. I didn't flinch. I had expected it, after all, it was always the same. My father's voice, as predictable as ever, laced with that familiar blend of entitlement and disappointment. The same voice that had always made it clear my accomplishments were never enough, as long as my aims were bigger, louder, more visible. He told me, casually, that my sister's family was moving in, that I should be grateful to host them. If I didn't like it, well, there was the door. No discussion, no negotiation, just an order. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I just listened, my thumb tracing the glass as I absorbed his words. It wasn't surrender. No, this was something else. It was permission. Permission to finally play my hand. I thought about the years of being pushed aside, of being told my success wasn't mine to claim. Mayim, born first, born loud, always the center of attention. I had learned early on to stay quiet, to shrink into the background, to make myself small. When I graduated at the top of my class, they praised her for guiding me. When I bought my first car, earned through my own savings, they scolded me for not letting her choose the color. And when she married a man whose greatest achievement was his carefully groomed beard, they celebrated as if her union somehow elevated the entire family. By the time I turned 25, I knew the truth. I wasn't a daughter. I was scaffolding. Someone they only noticed when they needed to climb. But all of that was behind me now. I had built something for myself, far away from the roles they tried to force me into. This villa, my villa, was my freedom. It wasn't just a house by the sea. It was the life I had fought for, earned with my own hands. It had nothing to do with them, and I was okay with that. Still, when my parents called, I couldn't help but feel that familiar flicker of resentment. The trap was already set, and they didn't even know it. They thought they could waltz in, take what they wanted, and I would simply comply. What they didn't know was that I was done playing the part they had written for me. This time, I wasn't the invisible one. I wasn't the scapegoat. I was the one in control. And when they arrived, I would remind them of that. The day they arrived, I could already feel the tension building, even before I saw their cars approaching. The air around the villa seemed to change, heavier, thicker, as if the very space I had worked so hard to carve out for myself had suddenly been violated. I stood at the window, watching as the familiar, worn cars pulled up the driveway. 3 cars. Enough luggage to start a new civilization, no doubt. I had known this day would come, but knowing didn't make it any easier. First, it was Mayim. She stepped out of the car, sunglasses on, despite the fact that the sun was behind her, casting long, fading shadows. She didn't even look at me. She simply looked past me, straight ahead, her eyes locking onto the villa, as if she were inspecting her new kingdom. The way she moved, the way she always had, like, the world was just waiting for her to take charge. That sense of entitlement, as if the villa had always been hers. Then came my mother, brushing past me with that dismissive gesture I had known all my life. She gave me that pat on the arm, the one that said everything. "I'm doing you a favor by acknowledging you." Her eyes barely met mine as she passed, her gaze already scanning the house, mentally rearranging everything to fit her idea of what the space should look like. "You'll need to move your things out of the master bedroom," she said, as though it were a simple request. "Mayim needs space." I didn't react. I just nodded. Of course. Every word was carefully measured, not to provoke, not to engage in a fight. I had no intention of making this easy for them. They moved through the house, each of them talking over the other. The sound of their voices filled the space I had worked so hard to claim as my own, filling it with demands, complaints, and criticisms. They were annoyed that the air conditioning wasn't cool enough, that the guest towels were too plain, that the tea I had served wasn't to their liking. They weren't here for a visit, not really. They were here to take over, to assume that the villa, this peaceful place that had been my refuge, was theirs by right. But I said nothing. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't let them see how much it hurt to have them walk through my doors like they owned the place. I simply observed, quietly. They thought they were in control. They thought I was still the girl who would back down, the girl who would make herself small just to fit in. But I wasn't that girl anymore. As the evening went on, the reality of their presence began to settle over me like a heavy fog. I moved through the motions, serving tea, offering food, making conversation. Shallow words, empty pleasantries. They were waiting for me to show weakness, to crack under the pressure, but I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. I had learned long ago that silence could be as powerful as words. So I kept quiet, letting their assumptions grow, letting them believe that this was just another one of their moves, that I would let them walk all over me again. They didn't know I had already won. The next day, I woke to the sound of my family moving about the house. The noise was different now, more invasive. They weren't just passing through, they were settling in. I could hear them upstairs, discussing the layout of the rooms as if they owned the place, as if it had always been theirs. Mayim's laugh, loud and insistent, carried through the walls. It was a sound I had grown to dread over the years, but today, it felt like a declaration. They were here to claim something that wasn't theirs. I could feel the anger starting to build inside me, but I kept it in check. This wasn't the time for outbursts. No, the time for that would come later. I moved silently through the house, doing my best to stay out of the way. I could see the way they were treating the villa like a hotel, their demands escalating as they became more comfortable in my space. My mother asked if I had any more blankets. There were already plenty. My sister complained that the view from her room wasn't as perfect as she expected. None of them seemed to care about me, about what I had worked for. It was as if I didn't exist beyond the walls of this house. They hadn't asked about how I was doing, or how I could possibly afford a place like this. They never thought to wonder what my life had been like since I moved in. They just assumed everything would fall into place for them, as it always had. But something had changed. Something had shifted within me. That afternoon, when I was helping my father carry some bags up to the guest room, I spotted a glimpse of something in his briefcase. Tucked in the corner of the study, a file thick with papers. It was a subtle thing, but it caught my attention. Without thinking, I moved toward it, my curiosity overpowering any hesitation. I opened the briefcase slowly, my hand steady, and pulled out the file. The documents inside were official-looking, neat, and precise. My heart skipped a beat as I read through them. The title deed to the villa, my villa, was in there. But it wasn't mine anymore. The name at the top wasn't even mine. I swallowed hard. There it was. The evidence I had suspected but never confirmed. They had planned to transfer the villa to Mayim. They assumed I wouldn't notice, that I wouldn't care. After all, I'd never been the priority. I was just the tool they used when they needed something. And now, they were taking the one thing I had fought for. I felt the ground beneath me shift. It wasn't shock, not exactly. It was clarity. Cold, sharp clarity. I wasn't just an asset to them. I was something to be controlled, something to be used. But I wasn't going to let that happen. I didn't confront them then. I didn't say a word. I slipped the documents back into the briefcase, closed it carefully, and walked out of the study. No one had seen me. But I knew deep down, this was the moment when everything changed. I wasn't going to let them take what was mine. I wasn't going to let them continue treating me like I didn't matter. Not anymore. The plan was already forming in my mind, step by step. I would wait just a little longer. Let them settle in. Let them think they had won. They didn't know it yet, but I was already 3 steps ahead of them. They had underestimated me for the last time. I spent the next few days moving in and out of the house, but my focus was elsewhere. My family carried on with their usual demands, as if everything were normal. As if this villa, the one thing I had worked for, was just another part of the family's domain. It was maddening, but I kept my composure. I couldn't let them see that it was getting to me. They couldn't know how deeply their disregard hurt, not yet. Instead, I made arrangements. Quiet, deliberate steps that would ensure I would no longer be at their mercy. I didn't tell anyone, not even Jessica, not yet. I wasn't ready for her to get involved. Not until I had everything in place. My lawyer was the first person I contacted. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. I simply told him I needed the villa transferred into a private trust, sealed and unassailable. He made the necessary calls, arranged the documents, and in a matter of days it was done. I had always prided myself on being a meticulous planner, and now, more than ever, I needed to be. Every step, every decision was calculated. I installed security cameras around the property, making sure nothing was left to chance. Each conversation with my family was recorded, every look, every comment. If they were going to think they could take my home, they would need to be confronted with the truth of their actions. During this time, I kept my interactions with them short and civil. I didn't engage with their complaints, didn't respond to their criticisms. I made sure they thought nothing was amiss. They assumed I was as willing to give in as I always had been. But this time, I wasn't going to be their doormat. I wasn't going to let them steal what I had built. And so, I waited. It was strange in a way. For so long I had been the one who reacted, the one who let my family's demands control my emotions. But now, I had the power. I was the one in control of the narrative, and I wasn't about to give that up. I watched them with a quiet intensity, knowing they were oblivious to what I was preparing. I didn't rush. I had all the time I needed. Patience had always been my greatest strength. It had been a survival mechanism, a way to deal with years of being ignored. And now, that same patience was going to deliver the final blow. When the time came, I would make sure they never underestimated me again. The day they arrived, I was ready. I had prepared myself for this moment, mentally and emotionally. I had expected them to walk through the door, as if they owned the place, just like they always had. But this time, I would not let them take it from me. It was just before sunset when I heard the sound of their cars pulling into the driveway. 3 of them. Just as I had predicted. The familiar rumble of the engines echoed in the quiet, and my heart rate barely picked up. I stood by the window, watching them through the sheer curtains as they climbed out of their vehicles. My sister, Mayim, stepped out first. The same arrogance, the same smug confidence. She didn't even look at me as she walked up to the door, sunglasses on despite the fading light. Behind her, my mother and father followed, moving like a coordinated team. They acted as if they owned the place, their faces already set with that entitled look I had come to expect. The air around me felt thick, but I stood still, watching them without a word. Everything is fine, I whispered to myself. I had everything under control. They walked through the front door without knocking. It was as if they thought they had a right to enter. No invitation needed. I watched them filter into the house, my father immediately making comments about the furniture, my mother already placing herself in the kitchen to criticize my lack of elegance. They were settling in, taking over. I remained quiet, not engaging. But my silence wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a reminder of my power. I was the one in control now. After a while, I made my way into the living room where they had gathered. They were in the middle of complaining about the air conditioning, which they deemed inadequate. They discussed the layout of the rooms, as if they had already decided where everything should go. It was maddening, but I kept my face neutral. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me angry. I simply listened, the weight of their words rolling off me like water on stone. "Is this all you have?" My mother's voice broke through the air, sharp and critical, as she picked up a decorative vase from the side table. "It's too small. Gina, you could have done better." I took a breath, a familiar sting of her words hitting harder than it should have. But I didn't react. Instead, I offered her a cold smile. "I think it's perfect, thank you," I said. My voice was steady, calm. The tension in the room was thick. But I didn't flinch. I had worked hard for this. Every inch of this villa was earned. This was mine, not theirs. They continued to wander through the house, commenting on things they didn't like, asking where I had put things, trying to make themselves at home. My father's voice carried over the others, demanding that I move my things out of the master bedroom, so Mayim could have it. "It's not your room anymore," he said flatly, as if it had always been his to decide. I didn't react. I just nodded, acknowledging his demand. He expected me to fight back, to argue, to raise my voice. But I wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. Instead, I kept it all inside. I knew what I had to do, and I was going to make them feel the consequences of their actions. Later that night, after dinner, I told them all to gather in the living room. I could see the way they sat, comfortably sprawled on the couches, as if they belonged here. My mother and father sat side by side, their attention focused on the latest complaint about my decor, while Mayim just sat, looking at her phone, uninterested in anything but herself. That was when I made my move. I walked into the room, a folder in my hands. I set it down on the coffee table between us. "What's this?" Mayim asked, glancing up, still not fully aware of what was about to happen. "Something you should all see?" I said quietly, my voice calm but firm. I watched as they opened the folder, their faces shifting from confusion to disbelief, their expressions falling as they saw the papers inside. The property trust, the updated title deed, the time-stamped legal transfer of the villa. It was no longer in my name. It was no longer up for discussion. It had been transferred to a private trust, untouchable and unrecognizable to them. "This villa isn't in my name anymore," I said quietly. "And it's certainly not available for gifting." My father's face turned red with anger. "You can't do this," he spat. But I already had, and they knew it. I didn't need to say another word. Their reactions spoke louder than any argument I could have made. My mother's voice trembled as she stammered, "Where will we stay?" But I didn't feel sorry for them. Not this time. I shrugged, my eyes meeting hers without hesitation. "You told me last night that this place was yours. I assumed you had a plan." Mayim stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Are you throwing us out?" Her voice was sharp, incredulous. No, I replied, leaning forward slightly, my voice colder now. I'm reminding you that you were never invited in. The silence that followed was thick, heavier than anything I had felt in years. The shock on their faces was more than enough. They didn't know how to respond. My father slammed the folder shut and stood up, his face twisted with fury. He didn't shout, didn't argue. He just left. My mother followed, grabbing Mayim's hand as they both hurried out the door. There was no dramatic speech, no apologies. Just the sound of car doors slamming in the distance. A final punctuation mark to the story I had spent so long waiting to finish. I stood in the living room, my heart pounding in my chest. But it wasn't anger or frustration I felt. It was peace. The weight that had been crushing me for years finally lifted. I had taken back control, and it was the sweetest feeling I had ever known. The sound of their cars fading into the distance echoed through the quiet house. The doors had slammed shut. The same ones that had once felt like a prison to me, now the final boundary between us. I stood in the same spot, frozen for a moment, letting the silence settle over me. It was different now, calm, but charged with a sense of finality I hadn't realized I needed until now. The villa felt almost untouched in their absence, like a painting left unfinished. I walked around slowly, taking it all in. Every corner of this place had been chosen carefully, from the quiet, serene view of the sea to the small touches that made it mine. It was everything I had dreamed of and more. And now, finally, it was mine in a way it had never been before. For years, I had lived under the shadow of my family's expectations, of their demands. I had watched as they moved through my life, taking what they wanted without so much as a thank you. And yet, here I was, in this house, with this life, untouched by their influence. It felt like a rebirth, a moment of clarity, of peace. I made my way to the balcony once more, the place where I had first stood and imagined what it would be like to have this all to myself. The ocean stretched out before me, calm and endless. The sun had set completely now, leaving only the soft glow of the moonlight on the water. It was perfect, but I couldn't ignore the fact that this victory had come at a price. I hadn't expected the sense of emptiness that lingered after they left. It wasn't just about the house. It wasn't even about the betrayal they had tried to pull. It was something deeper, something I hadn't fully understood until now. For so long, I had been afraid to admit how much I needed them, despite everything. They were my family, after all. The people who should have been there for me, who should have supported me. And yet, they never did. The realization that I didn't need their approval, that I could stand on my own, was freeing, but it also left me with a strange sense of loss. Not for what they had taken, but for the connection that had never been there in the first place. I looked out over the sea again, the waves gently rolling, the sound of the water filling the silence. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. I hadn't just taken back my home. I had taken back my life. I had stepped out of the role they had written for me, the one I had been forced to play for so long. And now, I was the one in control of my own story, no longer bound by their expectations or their manipulations. And that, I realized, was the real victory. The next morning, I woke to the sound of birds outside the window and the soft crash of waves against the shore. The villa was quiet, peaceful, the calm after the storm. I couldn't help but smile to myself. They were gone. The weight of their presence, the pressure of living up to their expectations, was finally lifted. But as the day passed, I found myself restless. It felt too quiet, too empty. I had spent so long preparing for their departure, thinking it would feel like a moment of pure victory. But now that it had come, it was bittersweet. There was a certain emptiness that lingered, an echo of all the years I had spent wanting their approval, wanting them to see me for who I was. not just as a means to an end. I sat by the window, watching as the light shifted, the world outside changing in subtle ways. It wasn't a sudden transformation, not like the one I had imagined. There were no fireworks, no dramatic conclusion. It was just me, alone with my thoughts, still trying to make sense of everything that had happened. Then, the sound of the phone ringing broke the silence. My heart skipped as I glanced at the screen. It was my father. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, letting it go to voicemail. But I had to answer. This wasn't over yet. "Hello," I said, my voice steady, even though I felt the tension rising in my chest. "Gina." My father's voice came through, cold and distant. "We need to talk." I could already feel my pulse quicken. I had prepared myself for this. But hearing his voice still had a way of making me second. "Guess everything." "About what?" I asked, trying to keep the edge from my voice. "I'm coming by," he said. "There's something we need to settle." I took a deep breath. "What is it that we need to settle, exactly?" I asked, trying to keep my composure. "I'll be there in an hour," he said, and before I could respond, he hung up. I sat there for a moment, the phone still pressed to my ear. I hadn't expected him to come back so quickly. I had thought the confrontation was over, that they would leave and that would be the end of it. But I should have known better. My family didn't know how to let go that easily. An hour later, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway jolted me from my thoughts. I walked to the door and watched as my father stepped out of the car, his face as rigid and unreadable as ever. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He walked straight into the house, his eyes scanning the space, clearly uncomfortable with the fact that it was mine, and not his. "You've made a mistake," he said, his voice low but filled with authority. "You don't get to do this, Gina. This place isn't yours to control. Your sister needs help. We're family." I stood tall, refusing to let him see how much his words still stung. "I am family too," I said, my voice calm but firm. "And I'm done being treated like I don't matter." His eyes narrowed. "You think you've won, don't you? This isn't over. You don't know what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing," I replied, my voice unwavering. "I'm taking control of my life, something you never gave me the chance to do." He shook his head, the anger barely contained in his clenched jaw. "This villa won't last. You'll regret this." I took a step forward, meeting his gaze. "No, I won't," I said. "Because for the first time in my life, I'm finally doing what's best for me." The silence between us felt heavy, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that came when you finally stopped pretending, when you realized that the past no longer had power over you. My father turned and walked out without another word, the door closing softly behind him. I stood there for a moment, the weight of his visit settling over me. I had expected anger. I had expected confrontation. But what I hadn't expected was the peace that followed. This was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment I finally stepped out from under their shadow. The moment I took back control. It wasn't about the villa anymore. It was about me. And for the first time in my life, I was choosing myself. As the car pulled away, I walked to the balcony once again, looking out at the endless horizon. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the sea. It was beautiful, peaceful, just like I was beginning to feel. And for the first time, I knew that no matter what came next, I was ready. The sun had set, leaving the sky painted with hues of deep orange and pink. The villa was still, and for the first time since they left, I felt truly at peace. The kind of peace that settles deep inside. The kind that fills every corner of the space you've fought for, and finally made your own. The air felt lighter, the weight of years of resentment and neglect lifting with every breath I took. I walked through the house again, this time with new eyes. The rooms that once felt heavy with expectation now felt like they belonged to me. Each piece of furniture, every picture on the wall, every book on the shelf, it was all a reflection of me. The home I had built for myself from scratch, from nothing but hard work and determination. I stood in front of the window, the sea stretching out before me, endless and calm. I could hear the soft waves lapping at the shore, a steady rhythm that seemed to match the beat of my own heart. The world outside was vast and untouched. Just like the future, I was finally beginning to embrace. There was no more pretending. No more trying to fit into the mold they had tried to force on me. No more fighting for their approval. For the first time in my life, I had claimed my own space, my own voice. I wasn't just a backdrop in their story. I was the one writing my own chapters now. I didn't need them. I had never really needed them. The truth had been staring me in the face all along, and I had finally seen it. I had been trying to prove something to people who would never see me for who I was. But now, I could see myself clearly. And that was enough. I walked to the balcony, looking out at the darkening sky. The moon was rising, its light shimmering on the surface of the water, casting a soft glow on the world below. I felt small in the face of it all, but in the best way possible. Small but powerful. Small but free. I had spent so many years chasing something, chasing their approval, their love, their recognition. But now I realized that the only thing worth chasing was my own happiness. And I had found it, not in the approval of others, but in the strength I had built for myself. The breeze was cool against my skin, and I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the night wash over me. This was my life now. And it was mine to shape, to build, to protect. I had taken back my power. And for the first time in so long, I felt whole.